The stench of lye soap and dirty water filled Francesca Palmer's nostrils as she pushed the heavy brush across the saloon floor, her knees aching against the rough wooden planks that had seen too many boots and too much blood. It was well past midnight in Weaverville, California, and the last drunk had stumbled out hours ago, leaving behind a mess that seemed to grow rather than diminish with each passing stroke of her brush. Her dark hair hung in damp tendrils around her face, escaping from the loose bun she had tied that morning, back when morning still felt like a concept that belonged to her instead of just another marker of time passing in endless drudgery. She had been scrubbing floors in this god-forsaken saloon for 3 months now, ever since her father had died in a mining accident up in the hills, leaving her with nothing but debts she never knew existed, and a town full of men who saw her grief as opportunity. The saloon owner, a man named Edgar Simmons with breath that smelled of whiskey and teeth gone brown from tobacco, had offered her this job with a smile that made her skin crawl, telling her it was either this or worse, and they both knew what worse meant in a town like Weaverville in the year 1875. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked and bleeding in places where the harsh soap had eaten through whatever softness they once possessed. She was 20 years old and felt ancient, her body heavy with exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones now, a permanent resident that no amount of sleep could evict. The brush made a rhythmic sound against the floor, a whisper of bristles on wood that had become the soundtrack to her existence. The door opened behind her, and Francesca did not bother to look up. Probably Edgar coming to inspect her work or worse, to stand too close and make comments about how a pretty girl like her was wasting herself on her knees when she could be making real money upstairs. She had rebuffed those suggestions 100 times, but he never seemed to hear the word no, or perhaps he heard it just fine and simply chose to ignore it. "We are closed," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had not spoken to another soul in hours. The footsteps that approached were different from Edgar's shuffling gait. These were heavy, purposeful, the sound of boots that had walked through wilderness and wore the mud of mountain trails. She looked up then, brush still in hand, water dripping from the bristles onto the floor she had just cleaned. The man standing in the doorway was unlike anyone she had seen in Weaverville before, and that was saying something in a town that attracted all manner of rough characters. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly filled the doorframe, and arms that strained against the fabric of his worn cotton shirt, muscles defined even in the dim lamplight. His hair was dark and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered in the way of men who spent their days under open sky and their nights under stars. A thick beard covered his jaw, but his eyes were what caught her attention, clear and gray like winter morning fog, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart suddenly pound in her chest. "I said we are closed," Francesca repeated, but her voice came out weaker this time, less certain. The mountain man said nothing for a long moment, just stood there taking in the scene before him. A young woman on her knees in the middle of the night, scrubbing floors in a saloon that reeked of stale beer and broken dreams. His jaw tightened, and something flickered across his face that might have been anger, though it did not seem directed at her. "You got a name?" he finally asked, his voice deep and rough like stones grinding together but not unkind. "Francesca Palmer," she said, and then, because some part of her still clung to the manners her mother had taught her before consumption took her 5 years ago, she added, "And you are Owen Ellis," he said, taking a step closer. "And you ought not to be doing this." Francesca felt a bitter laugh escape her throat before she could stop it. Ought not to be doing what exactly? Working, trying to survive, Please enlighten me as to what I ought to be doing instead, since you seem to know so much about my situation." Owen's expression did not change at her sharp words. If anything, he looked more determined. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and before Francesca could process what was happening, he bent down and took hold of her arm, his grip gentle but firm, and lifted her to her feet as though she weighed nothing at all. "You ought not to be on your knees scrubbing floors at midnight for a man who underpays you and looks at you like you are something he can buy," Owen said, his voice low and steady. "And you will never kneel like that again if I have anything to say about it." Francesca stared at him, too shocked to pull away, though she knew she should. His hand was still on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she could feel the calluses on his palm, the roughness of a man who worked with his hands. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the sheer size of him that should have frightened her but somehow did not. "You do not know me," she managed to say. "You do not know anything about me or what I have to do to survive in this town." "I know enough," Owen said. "I have been in Weaverville for 2 days now, asking questions, listening to people talk. I know your daddy died in the Lucky Strike mine when a tunnel collapsed. I know Edgar Simmons bought up his debts for pennies on the dollar, and has been using them to keep you working here for wages that would not feed a dog. I know you sleep in a room above the storage shed out back, and I know that every man in this saloon thinks he has the right to put his hands on you just because you are serving drinks or cleaning their mess." Francesca felt her face flush with a mixture of shame and anger. "If you know all that, then you know I do not have a choice. I have nowhere else to go, no family, no money. This is what I have." "No," Owen said, and the firmness in his voice made her look up at him again. "This is what Edgar Simmons wants you to believe you have. There is a difference." He let go of her arm then and took a step back, as though he realized how close he had been standing, how the intensity of the moment might seem improper. But his eyes never left her face. "I have a cabin up in the mountains about 15 miles north of here," he continued. "Built it myself 5 years back when I decided I had enough of mining camps and company towns. I hunt, trap, do some logging when I need supplies. It is a hard life in some ways, but it is an honest one, and it is mine. No man tells me what to do or how to live." Francesca frowned, not understanding why he was telling her this. "That sounds very nice for you, but I fail to see what it has to do with me." Owen reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, and for the first time since he had entered the saloon, he looked uncertain, almost shy. "I came down to Weaverville to sell some furs and buy supplies. Planned to head back tomorrow. But while I was here, I heard people talking about you, about the situation you are in, and I got to thinking about how I have that cabin with more space than one man needs, and how I have been alone up there for 5 years now, and how maybe that was not such a good way to live after all." Francesca's heart began to pound again, harder this time, because she thought she understood what he was suggesting, and it terrified her more than staying in the saloon did, because at least here she knew what to expect, knew what kind of misery awaited her each day. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "No," Owen agreed, "but I would like to, and I figure you deserve a chance at something better than this." He gestured around the saloon with one broad hand. "I am not asking for anything from you except a chance. Come up to the cabin, see what kind of life it could be. If you hate it, if you hate me, I will bring you back to town myself, no questions asked. But at least give yourself the opportunity to choose something different." "Why?" Francesca asked, the word breaking in her throat. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Owen was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "My mama was in a situation like yours once, before my daddy found her. She was working in a boarding house in Denver, being worked near to death by the woman who owned it, and she had no way out. My daddy, he saw her one day looking so tired she could barely stand, and something in him just knew he had to help her. They got married 3 weeks later, and they had 30 good years together before she passed. He told me before he died that the best thing a man can do in this life is lift someone up when they are down, the way somebody once lifted him up when he needed it most. Francesca felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried since her father's funeral, had not allowed herself that weakness, and she was not about to start now in front of a stranger who had walked into her life with promises that seemed too good to be true. "I do not need charity," she said, lifting her chin. "Good," Owen replied. "Because I am not offering it. I am offering you work, fair work for fair wages. I need help with things around the cabin, cooking, mending, keeping the place livable during the winter months when I am out checking trap lines. And I am offering you respect, which is more than you are getting here. You would have your own room, your own space, and my word that I will never lay a hand on you unless you want me to." The sincerity in his voice made something crack in Francesca's chest, some wall she had built up over the months of hardship and fear. She looked down at her raw, bleeding hands, then at the bucket of dirty water beside her, the brush she had been pushing across these floors night after night. "I do not know you," she said again, but this time it sounded less like an accusation and more like a plea for reassurance. "Then get to know me," Owen said simply. "I will be at the general store tomorrow morning at first light, loading up supplies. If you decide you want to take a chance on something different, meet me there. If you do not show, I will understand and I will never bother you again." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the door, his heavy footsteps echoing in the empty saloon. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at her one more time. "You deserve better than this, Francesca Palmer," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving Francesca standing in the middle of the saloon floor with her brush and bucket, her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibilities that both terrified and thrilled her. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the narrow cot in her cramped room above the storage shed and stared at her hands, at the evidence of 3 months of degradation and exploitation. She thought about Owen Ellis and his gray eyes that looked at her like she was a person worthy of respect rather than a commodity to be used. She thought about his offer, about a cabin in the mountains, about a life that might contain something other than endless scrubbing, and the constant fear of what Edgar Simmons might try next. She thought about her father, who had come to California with dreams of striking gold and had instead found only back-breaking labor in dark tunnels that eventually collapsed and crushed him. She thought about her mother, who had died believing that her daughter would have a better life than she had. And she thought about herself, about the woman she had been before desperation had forced her to her knees, and the woman she might still become if she had the courage to stand up. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the single small window of her room, Francesca made her decision. She owned very little, which made packing easy. She had 3 dresses, all worn and faded, 2 sets of undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small Bible with her family's names written inside the cover. She bundled everything into a cloth sack, then sat down at the small table that served as her only furniture besides the cot and wrote a note to Edgar Simmons. She kept it brief. "I quit. Do not come looking for me. Francesca Palmer." She left the note on the bar downstairs, where she knew Edgar would find it when he came in later that morning. Then she walked out of the saloon into the cool morning air, not bothering to look back. The general store was already open when she arrived, the owner sweeping the front steps. Francesca's stomach was tight with nerves, and she half expected to find that Owen Ellis had been some kind of fever dream, that she would wait, and he would never show, that she had just walked away from the only job she had over a fantasy. But then she saw him, leading 2 horses loaded with supplies out of the stable next to the store. He saw her at the same moment, and his stern face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger, almost boyish despite his size and the weathered quality of his skin. "You came," he said, and there was such genuine pleasure in his voice that Francesca felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. "I came," she confirmed, "though I may regret it." "You might," Owen agreed, still smiling, "but I will do my best to make sure you do not." He introduced her to the horses, a large roan gelding named Buck that was his riding horse, and a smaller bay mare named Maple that he used as a pack animal. He helped Francesca add her small bundle to Maple's load, then looked at her worn shoes with a slight frown. "Those are not going to hold up on the mountain trail," he said. "Wait here." He disappeared into the general store and emerged a few minutes later with a pair of sturdy leather boots. "Try these," he said, handing them to her. Francesca hesitated. "I cannot pay for those." "Consider it an advance on your wages," Owen said. "You are going to need them." The boots fit reasonably well, much better than her worn shoes that were more whole than leather at this point. Owen also bought her a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun and a canteen of water for the journey. "Ready?" he asked when she had changed into the boots and settled the hat on her head. Francesca took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The journey up into the mountains took most of the day. The trail was steep and rocky, winding through tall pines and alongside rushing creeks swollen with snowmelt from the higher elevations. Owen set a steady pace, clearly familiar with every turn and switchback, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about loose rocks. He walked rather than rode, leading Buck and allowing Francesca to ride Maple, which she appreciated since her body was not accustomed to such physical exertion after months of being confined to the saloon. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler and cleaner, scented with pine and wildflowers. Francesca found herself breathing deeply, filling her lungs with air that did not reek of tobacco smoke and spilled alcohol. She watched Owen's broad back as he walked ahead of her, noting the easy way he moved through the wilderness, the confidence in every step. He was clearly in his element here, far more so than he had seemed in town. They stopped for a brief lunch beside a creek, eating bread and cheese that Owen had packed. He was not much of a talker, Francesca discovered, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. He seemed like a man at peace with himself, content to let the sounds of the forest fill the quiet spaces. "How much farther?" Francesca asked as they prepared to continue. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4, Owen replied. "We will make it well before dark." As promised, they reached Owen's cabin in the late afternoon when the sun was still high enough to cast everything in golden light. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, built from logs that Owen had clearly cut and fitted himself. It was larger than Francesca had expected, with a solid roof and a stone chimney, a covered porch across the front, and several outbuildings including a barn, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop. "This is beautiful," Francesca said, and she meant it. After the cramped, dirty room above the saloon storage shed, the cabin looked like a palace. Owen's face colored slightly at the compliment. "It serves its purpose," he said gruffly, but she could tell he was pleased. He helped her down from Maple and showed her around the property. The barn housed 2 more horses, both sturdy mountain breeds, along with a milk cow and some chickens. There was a garden plot that needed tending, already showing signs of neglect, and a root cellar dug into the hillside for storing food. Inside, the cabin was simply furnished but well built. The main room had a large stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and several comfortable-looking chairs near the fireplace. There were 2 bedrooms off the main room, and Owen showed her to the smaller one. "This will be yours," he said. "I put fresh linens on the bed this morning before I left for town, and there is space in the wardrobe for your things. The door has a latch on the inside, and I want you to use it. You are safe here, Francesca, but I know that is going to take time for you to believe, so I want you to feel secure." Francesca looked around the room, taking in the real bed with its thick mattress and clean quilts, the window that looked out onto the forest, the wardrobe and washstand, the small mirror on the wall. It was more space and more comfort than she had known since her father died, perhaps even before that, when they had lived in a drafty miner's shack that leaked when it rained. "Thank you," she said quietly. Owen nodded. "I will leave you to settle in. There is water in the kitchen if you want to wash up, and I will start on dinner in a bit. Nothing fancy, just venison stew, but it is filling." After he left, Francesca sat on the edge of the bed and felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances and the kindness of a stranger who had lifted her up when she had been at her lowest point. She cried for her father and mother, for the girl she had been before loss and hardship had beaten her down, and for the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could become something worth living again. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that Francesca gradually learned and then came to depend upon. Owen woke early before dawn, and she soon found herself rising at the same time, unwilling to let him start his day alone. She would make coffee while he tended to the animals, and they would eat breakfast together as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Owen was a man of few words, but Francesca discovered that his actions spoke volumes. He was patient when she did not know how to do something, showing her how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, how to identify which plants in the forest were edible and which were poisonous. He was respectful, always knocking before entering a room she was in, always asking before touching her even in the most innocent of circumstances, like helping her over a fallen log on the trail. And he was strong, not just in body but in character. She saw it in the way he worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, in the way he cared for his animals with gentle hands, in the way he would sit by the fire in the evenings and carve small figures from wood that he gave to her without ceremony, a bird, a horse, a flower, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to make something beautiful just to see her smile. Francesca found herself watching him more and more often, fascinated by the play of muscles in his arms when he chopped wood, by the concentration on his face when he worked on mending a broken fence, by the rare but genuine smiles that transformed his stern features into something warm and almost boyish. She noticed the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, how his beard was streaked with silver in places, how his gray eyes would soften when he looked at her. She also noticed the way her heart would speed up when he came near, the way her skin felt warm when their hands accidentally touched, the way she had started to care what she looked like, braiding her hair more carefully and taking time with her appearance in a way she had not bothered with in months. One evening, about a month after she had arrived at the cabin, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Owen was whittling, his knife moving in steady, practiced strokes, while Francesca mended one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the fading light. "Can I ask you something?" she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Always, Owen replied, not looking up from his work. "Why did you really come find me that night? The truth, not the story about your parents." Owen's hand stilled and he looked up at her then, his gray eyes serious. "That was the truth," he said, "but it was not the whole truth." He set down his carving and knife and turned to face her more fully. "I saw you once before, about a week before I came into the saloon that night. I was at the general store and you were there buying supplies for Edgar. You dropped a sack of flour and it split open all over the floor. Edgar, he was there too, and he started yelling at you, calling you clumsy and worthless, saying he was going to take the cost of the flour out of your wages. You just stood there and took it, apologized over and over, even though it was clear that the sack had already been torn and that was why it split." Francesca remembered that day. She had been so humiliated, standing in the middle of the store while Edgar berated her and everyone watched. "I wanted to step in," Owen continued. "I wanted to knock Edgar on his backside and tell you that you did not have to take that kind of treatment from anyone, but I did not. I told myself it was not my business, that I did not know the situation, all the things people tell themselves when they want an excuse not to get involved. But I could not stop thinking about you, about the look on your face, like you had accepted that this was all your life was ever going to be." He paused, his jaw working as though he were struggling with the words. "I went back up to my cabin and tried to forget about it, but I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face. So I came back down to town and started asking questions, and the more I learned about what Edgar was doing to you, the angrier I got. That night I came into the saloon, I had not really planned what I was going to say or do. I just knew I had to try to help you, even if you told me to go to hell." Francesca felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I am glad you tried," she said softly. "I am glad I listened." "So am I," Owen said, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings, and Francesca thought he might lean forward, might close the distance between them and kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, wanted to feel his lips on hers, his strong arms around her. But another part of her was still afraid, still scarred by the months of being seen as nothing more than an object to be used. Owen seemed to sense her conflict because he looked away first, picking up his whittling again. "You do not owe me anything, Francesca," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. You are here because I offered you a job and a safe place to live, not because I expect anything else from you." "I know," Francesca said, "but what if I want there to be something more?" The words were out before she could stop them, and she felt her face flush hot with embarrassment. But Owen's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like hope. "Do you?" he asked, his voice rough. Francesca set down her mending and folded her hands in her lap, gathering her courage. "I have been thinking about it a lot lately. About you, about us, about what this is between us. I know I have only been here a month, and I know that is not very long, but I feel like I know you, Owen. I see the kind of man you are in everything you do every day. And I find myself wanting to be near you, wanting to hear your voice, wanting to see you smile. I think about what it would be like to be held by you, to be kissed by you, and I do not feel afraid. I feel excited." Owen set down his carving and knife with exaggerated care, as though he needed something to do with his hands to keep them from reaching for her. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "I have from the start, if I am being honest. But I did not want to rush you, did not want to make you feel like you had to return my feelings just because I helped you. You have been through enough of men trying to take from you. I wanted you to have time to heal, to figure out what you want without any pressure from me. That is why I am falling in love with you," Francesca said, and watched his eyes widen at her words. "Because you think about what I need, what I want. Because you see me as a person, not a possession. Because when you look at me, I feel like I matter." "You do matter," Owen said fiercely. "You matter more than you could possibly know." He stood then and held out his hand to her. Francesca took it and let him pull her to her feet, her heart hammering in her chest as he drew her close. He was so large that she barely came up to his chest, and she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. "I am going to kiss you now," Owen said, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. "If that is not what you want, tell me and I will stop." "It is what I want," Francesca whispered. When Owen kissed her, it was gentle and careful, as though she were something precious that might break. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and his hands came up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you, Francesca Palmer," he said. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you on your knees in that saloon and knew I had to help you. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you hum when you cook, and the way you talk to the chickens like they are your friends. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you are worth." Francesca felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too, Owen Ellis. I did not think I could ever feel this way about anyone, not after everything I have been through. But you make me feel safe and cherished and like my life can be more than just surviving. You make me want to live again." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars came out overhead, and Francesca felt a peace settle over her that she had not known in years. This was what it felt like to be home, she realized. Not a place, but a person. Owen was her home now, and she was his. The summer passed in a blur of happiness that Francesca had not known was possible. She and Owen fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day and sitting close by the fire at night, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Denver, about his parents who had loved each other deeply, about his decision to leave civilization behind and build a life in the mountains. She told him about her own childhood, about her mother's gentle nature and her father's stubborn optimism, about the dreams she had once had before life had beaten them out of her. They talked about serious things and silly things, discovering shared opinions on some matters and enjoyable disagreements on others. Francesca learned that Owen loved poetry, though he would never admit it in town, and that he had a collection of books hidden in a trunk that he read by firelight on long winter evenings. Owen learned that Francesca had a beautiful singing voice that she had not used in months, and he would request songs after dinner, sitting with his eyes closed and a smile on his face as she filled the cabin with music. They kissed often, sweet kisses and passionate kisses and comfortable kisses that felt like coming home. But Owen never pushed for more, content to let Francesca set the pace. She loved him for that restraint, for his respect, even as she found herself wanting more, wanting to belong to him completely. One night in late August, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Francesca made her decision. She stood and held out her hand to Owen, who looked up at her with curiosity and something deeper in his gray eyes. "Come with me," she said quietly. Owen took her hand and let her lead him to his bedroom. They had not been in there together since that first day when he had shown her around the cabin. It was a simple room, dominated by a large bed that Owen had built himself, with a wardrobe and a washstand and little else. "Francesca," Owen said, his voice uncertain. "You do not have to, I know I do not have to," she interrupted gently. I want to be with you, Owen, completely, if you want that too." "You know I do," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "But are you sure?" "There is no rush, I am sure," Francesca said, and she was. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. What happened next was tender and sweet, and so different from what Francesca had feared intimacy might be. Owen was gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. He worshipped her body with his hands and lips, making her feel beautiful and desired in a way she had never experienced. And when they finally came together, it was with a rightness that made Francesca understand what it meant to become one with another person. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in Owen's bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and Francesca felt complete in a way she had not known she was incomplete. "Marry me," Owen said into the darkness. Francesca lifted her head to look at him. "What?" "Marry me," Owen repeated, his gray eyes serious in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I know this is sudden, but I have never been more sure of anything. I love you, Francesca. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a family with you, grow old with you, spend every day showing you how much you mean to me. Say yes." Francesca felt her heart swell so large she thought it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Ellis." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and they made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss, celebrating the promise they had just made to each other. They were married 3 weeks later in Weaverville by the circuit preacher who came through once a month. Francesca wore a new dress that Owen had bought for her, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Owen had picked for her that morning. Owen wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly tied back, his beard freshly trimmed, and when he looked at her walking toward him in the small church, his eyes grew shiny with unshed tears. The ceremony was simple and brief, but the words meant everything. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and told Owen he could kiss his bride, Owen cupped Francesca's face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation sniffled and wiped at their eyes. They spent their wedding night at the cabin, and it was perfect. Owen had decorated the main room with more wildflowers, and he had made a special dinner of roasted chicken and potatoes, and a cake that was slightly lopsided but tasted delicious. They danced in the main room with no music, except the sound of their laughter, and then they went to bed and loved each other until the sun rose over the mountains. The next morning, Francesca woke to find Owen already up, standing at the window looking out at the forest. She got out of bed and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his broad back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Owen turned and pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "I was thinking about the first time I saw you, on your knees in that saloon, and how far we have both come since then. I was thinking about how lucky I am that you took a chance on me, that you trusted me enough to come up here and start a new life." "I am the lucky one," Francesca said. "You saved me, Owen, in every way a person can be saved." "No," Owen said firmly. "You saved yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else, the courage to leave, the strength to start over, the willingness to trust and love again, that was all you, Francesca." She looked up at him, at his handsome, weathered face, his gray eyes full of love and admiration, and felt her heart overflow with happiness. This man, this good, strong, kind man, was her husband. This was her life now, her home, her family. She would never kneel in subservience again because she had found someone who wanted to stand beside her as an equal, someone who saw her worth and cherished it. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Owen replied. "Always." The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work and simple pleasures. Owen continued his hunting and trapping, and Francesca managed the cabin and garden with increasing skill and confidence. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to make soap and candles, to sew and knit, and do all the things necessary for survival in the mountains. But more than that, she learned to be happy, to find joy in small moments like watching the sunrise with her husband or listening to the rain on the cabin roof at night. In the spring of 1877, Francesca discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable, and she felt a flutter of worry that he might not be happy about it. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens outside and picked her up, spinning her around the room until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as though he could not quite believe it. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father. Are you happy?" Francesca asked, though it was obvious he was. "Happy?" Owen set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "Francesca, I am beyond happy. I am thrilled, terrified, grateful, and about 100 other things all at once. This is everything I did not even know I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Francesca was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Owen worried over her constantly, trying to tempt her with different foods and making sure she rested enough. As she grew larger, the mountain climate became more challenging, the heat of summer oppressive and the simple tasks she had always done suddenly exhausting. But through it all, Owen was there, patient and supportive and endlessly loving. He took over more of the household work without complaint, did the heavy lifting, and sat with her in the evenings rubbing her swollen feet and reading to her from his collection of books. Their son was born in early November, when the first snows were just beginning to fall in the mountains. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Francesca was certain she could not continue, that the pain was too much. But Owen stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being her strength when she had none left. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Owen cut the cord with trembling hands and placed their son on Francesca's chest. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. "He is beautiful," Owen whispered, tears running unashamedly down his face. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you just did that." They named him Jacob after Owen's father, and he became the center of their world. Owen was a devoted father, walking the floor with Jacob when he cried at night, playing with him for hours on end as he grew, teaching him with patience and gentleness. Watching her husband with their son, Francesca fell in love with him all over again, seeing new depths to his character in the way he cared for this tiny, helpless being. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby to care for, but also richer and more full of joy. Francesca would sometimes think back to that night in the saloon, to the woman she had been then, broken and hopeless, and marvel at how much her life had changed. She had gone from scrubbing floors on her knees to standing tall as a wife and mother, valued and loved and respected. When Jacob was 2 years old, Francesca became pregnant again, and their daughter Sarah was born in the summer of 1880. Sarah was an easier baby than Jacob had been, more content and calm, and she looked just like Francesca with dark hair and eyes that shifted between green and brown depending on the light. With 2 children, the cabin felt smaller, so Owen built an addition, adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. He also built a proper schoolroom, determined that his children would have an education even living so far from town. Francesca taught them their letters and numbers, reading and writing. Using the books from Owen's collection and others, they bought on their occasional trips to Weaverville. Those trips to town became less frequent as the years passed. Owen preferred the solitude of the mountains, and Francesca found that she did too. They had everything they needed at the cabin: each other, their children, their animals, their land. The outside world seemed increasingly distant and unimportant, but they were not completely isolated. Other mountain families lived within a few hours' ride, and they would gather occasionally for barn raisings or harvest festivals, or just to socialize and let the children play together. Francesca formed friendships with the other wives, women who understood the challenges and rewards of mountain living, and she no longer felt alone or cut off from female companionship. On one trip to town, when Jacob was 8 and Sarah was 6, they ran into Edgar Simmons outside the general store. Francesca had not seen him since the morning she had walked away from the saloon, and she felt her body tense instinctively, old fears rising up despite the years that had passed. Edgar looked older and meaner, his face more lined, his body thinner. He stared at Francesca with a mixture of surprise and something uglier, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," he said, his voice oily. "If it is not Francesca Palmer, or I guess it is Francesca Ellis now from what I hear. Quite a step up from scrubbing my floors, is it not?" Before Francesca could respond, Owen moved, placing himself between her and Edgar with a deliberateness that was more intimidating than any show of aggression could have been. He did not say a word, just stood there, his considerable size and obvious strength making it clear that Edgar would be wise to walk away. Edgar's face paled and he took a step back. "No need for trouble," he said quickly. "I was just saying hello to an old employee." "She was never your employee," Owen said, his voice low and dangerous. "She was someone you exploited and mistreated, and if you ever speak to my wife again, if you even look at her, I will make sure you regret it. Are we clear?" Edgar nodded, stumbling over his words as he backed away. "Clear, perfectly clear, no offense meant." After he had scurried off, Owen turned to Francesca, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" Francesca took a deep breath and nodded. She was all right. More than all right, actually. Seeing Edgar again, seeing how small and pathetic he seemed now, had put into sharp relief how far she had come. That life, that scared, desperate woman she had been, felt like something from a different lifetime. "I am fine," she said, and meant it. "He cannot hurt me anymore. He has no power over me." Owen pulled her close, not caring that they were standing in the middle of the street, and kissed the top of her head. "You are right. He does not. You are strong and brave, and you are mine, and I will always protect you." "I know," Francesca said, leaning into his solid warmth. "I have always known that." That night, back at the cabin with the children asleep in their beds, Francesca and Owen made love with a passion and intensity that reminded them both of their wedding night. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together, Owen traced patterns on her bare shoulder and spoke quietly. "I never want you to doubt your worth," he said. "Not for a single moment. You are everything to me, Francesca. You and the children, this life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "I never doubt it," Francesca assured him. "How could I when you show me every single day how much you love me, when you look at me like I am the most precious thing in the world?" "Because you are," Owen said simply. "You are my world, Francesca. You and Jacob and Sarah. Everything else is just details." More years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, with Owen's gray eyes and serious demeanor. Sarah was smaller and more spirited, with Francesca's quick tongue and love of music. They were good children, hardworking and respectful, growing up with an understanding of the value of the land and the importance of family. In 1885, when Jacob was almost 9 and Sarah was 7, Francesca gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. And 3 years after that, their youngest, a daughter they named Elizabeth, completed their family. The cabin that Owen had built for himself as a solitary mountain man now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, of family dinners and bedtime stories, of a life rich with love and purpose. He added more rooms, more space, accommodating their growing family with the same careful attention to detail he brought to everything he did. Francesca watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. Jacob apprenticed with his father, learning to hunt and trap and navigate the mountains. Sarah helped Francesca with the younger children and the household, but she also showed a talent for drawing, filling pages with sketches of the world around her. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, already talking about going to college someday. And Elizabeth, the baby, was fearless and curious, constantly getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Owen took Francesca on a picnic to a meadow high in the mountains, leaving the children with a neighboring family. It was late summer, and the meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, the same kind he had picked for her wedding bouquet all those years ago. They spread a blanket and ate the food Francesca had packed, talking and laughing like the young couple they had once been. Owen had gone gray at the temples, and there were more lines on his face, but to Francesca, he was as handsome as ever, perhaps even more so, aged like fine wood, his character evident in every line and weathered place. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked as they lay side by side on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "Leaving town, coming up here with me, this life we chose." Francesca turned to look at him in surprise. "Regret it? Owen, how could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made? This life, our family, everything we have built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me my life back that night in the saloon, and every day since has been a gift." "You gave me my life too," Owen said, rolling to face her. "I was existing up here, surviving, but I was not really living. Not until you. You brought light and warmth and purpose to a life that had become too solitary, too limited. Our children, this family, it is all because you took a chance on a mountain man who walked into a saloon and made you a wild promise." "You kept that promise," Francesca said softly. "You said I would never kneel like that again, and I have not. You lifted me up in every way possible, Owen. You made me believe I was worth something, that I deserved respect and love and happiness. And then you spent 20 years proving it to me over and over again." Owen reached out and cupped her face, his touch still as gentle as it had been that first time on the porch. "I love you, Francesca Ellis. More now than I did when we married, which I would not have thought possible back then." "I love you too," Francesca said, "always and forever." They made love there in the meadow, under the wide blue sky, surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of birdsong, celebrating 20 years of marriage and the promise of many more to come. The children grew older, and one by one they began to leave the cabin to pursue their own lives. Jacob married a girl from a neighboring mountain family when he was 22, and they built a cabin a few miles away, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own space. Sarah met a young teacher who came to Weaverville and fell in love, marrying him and moving to town, where she taught art to children and sold her drawings to tourists passing through. Thomas did indeed go to college, studying at the University of California in Berkeley, much to Owen's initial dismay and eventual pride. He became a lawyer and settled in San Francisco, though he came home to visit as often as his work allowed. And Elizabeth, true to her independent spirit, became a nurse and worked in the hospital in Sacramento, caring for the sick and injured with the same fierce protectiveness she had shown her dolls as a child. Owen and Francesca found themselves alone again in the cabin, their children grown and living their own lives. It was an adjustment at first, the quiet seeming almost oppressive after years of noise and activity. But gradually, they settled back into the rhythm they had known at the beginning, just the two of them, working side by side during the day and sitting close by the fire at night. "We did well with them," Owen said one evening, talking about the children as he often did. "They are good people, all of them, kind and strong and capable." "They had a good example," Francesca said, reaching over to take his hand. "They learned from watching you, Owen. You showed them what it means to be a good man, a good husband, a good father. They will carry those lessons into their own families." "We showed them together," Owen corrected gently. "Everything good they are, everything they have become, it is because they had both of us. We were a team, Francesca, we still are." "Yes," Francesca agreed, squeezing his hand. "We still are." They grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Owen's hair went completely silver, and he moved a bit more stiffly on cold mornings, but he still chopped wood and tended the animals and cared for Francesca with the same devotion he always had. Francesca's hands developed arthritis that made certain tasks difficult, and she could not see quite as well as she used to, but she still cooked and cleaned and kept their home warm and welcoming. They had grandchildren now, a whole brood of them, and the cabin came alive again during holidays and summers when the children and grandchildren would descend for visits. Owen would take the older grandchildren hunting and fishing, teaching them the same skills he had taught their parents, while Francesca would bake pies and tell stories and hold the youngest ones on her lap, singing the same songs she had sung to their parents years before. One night, when Francesca was 68 years old and Owen was 72, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, wrapped in a quilt against the cool evening air. It was late fall, the trees blazing with color, the air crisp and clean. "Do you remember the first time we sat on this porch together?" Owen asked, his voice a bit rougher with age but still warm. "When you asked me why I really came to find you that night." "I remember," Francesca said, leaning against his shoulder. "It was the night I told you I was falling in love with you. And I told you that you mattered," Owen said, "that you mattered more than you could possibly know." "You have spent our entire marriage proving that to me," Francesca said. "Every single day, in 100 different ways, you have shown me that I matter, that I am loved, that I am valued. You kept the promise you made that night in the saloon, Owen. I never knelt in subservience again. Instead, I stood beside you as your equal, your partner, your wife. You gave me that gift. You gave me so much more," Owen said. "You gave me a reason to come down from this mountain and engage with the world again. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life richer than I ever imagined possible. You gave me love, Francesca. Real, deep, lasting love. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Francesca thought about her life, about the journey that had brought her from that saloon floor to this porch, and felt a deep satisfaction settle in her bones. She had started with nothing, broken and desperate, forced to her knees by circumstance and cruel men. But then Owen Ellis had walked into that saloon and lifted her up, literally and figuratively, and her life had changed completely. He had offered her respect and opportunity, safety, and love, and she had found the courage to accept it all. Together they had built something beautiful, a marriage, a family, a life. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children and grown old together, and through it all, Owen had kept his promise. She had never knelt in subservience again because she had found a man who wanted a partner, not a servant, who saw her strength and cherished it rather than trying to break it. "I would do it all again," Francesca said quietly. "Every single moment, even the hard parts, the painful parts. Because it all led me to you, to this life, to everything we have shared." "So would I," Owen agreed, in a heartbeat. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear overhead, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. They had proven that kindness and respect were stronger than cruelty and exploitation. That one person lifting up another could change the course of two lives forever. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to the life that Owen and Francesca had created together in this wild, beautiful place. And on the porch, wrapped in a quilt in each other's arms, they sat together in perfect contentment, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly like this. Side by side, hand in hand, hearts intertwined. Years continued to pass gently for Owen and Francesca, each season bringing its own rhythm of work and rest, of visits from children and grandchildren, of quiet evenings by the fire. They moved a bit slower now, but their love remained as constant as the mountains that surrounded them. On a crisp autumn morning in 1902, Owen woke before dawn as he always had, though these days he moved more carefully, his joints protesting the cold. He looked over at Francesca sleeping beside him, her hair silver in the pre-dawn light, her face peaceful. Even in sleep, even after all these years, looking at her made his heart swell with love. He got up quietly and went to start the coffee, a routine so ingrained it required no thought. As he stood at the stove waiting for the pot to boil, he looked around the cabin they had shared for 27 years of marriage, longer if you counted the months before they wed. Every inch of this place held memories. The spot by the fireplace where Jacob had taken his first steps, the kitchen table where Sarah had drawn countless pictures, the chair where he had held each of his children as babies and later his grandchildren. But more than anything, this cabin held his life with Francesca. Every room, every corner, every piece of furniture was tied to her presence, to their shared history. This was not just the cabin he had built as a solitary mountain man. It was the home they had made together, filled with laughter and love, and the everyday moments that comprised a life well lived. Francesca emerged from the bedroom as the sun was rising, wrapped in her shawl, and smiled when she saw Owen had already made coffee. Some things never changed. She went to him and he wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there together in the morning light, swaying slightly, not needing words. "Good morning, my love," Owen said, kissing the top of her head. "Good morning," Francesca replied, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and pine and something essentially Owen that she had loved for nearly 3 decades. They spent that day as they spent most days now, working at a slower pace but still working, still maintaining the cabin and land that had been their livelihood and sanctuary. Owen chopped wood, though he took more breaks than he once had. Francesca baked bread and mended clothes, her fingers working despite the arthritis that made them ache. In the afternoon, Jacob came by with his oldest son, now 15, and learning the mountain ways from his father and grandfather. Owen took the boy out to check the trap lines while Jacob stayed to help Francesca with some heavier chores. Father and son worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other so well that words were often unnecessary. "You and Ma, you are happy, right?" Jacob asked suddenly as they worked together to move a heavy trunk. Francesca looked at her son in surprise. "Of course we are happy. Why would you ask such a thing?" Jacob shrugged, looking embarrassed. "I do not know. Sometimes I think about how you and Pa met, about the situation you were in before he found you. And I wonder if you ever regret leaving town, leaving civilization, spending your life up here in the mountains." Francesca set down the linen she had been sorting and went to her son, placing a hand on his bearded cheek. He was so tall now, taller even than Owen, but to her he would always be her baby boy. "Jacob, listen to me carefully," she said. "Your father saved my life when he walked into that saloon. Not just from Edgar Simmons and that terrible situation, but from a life that would have slowly killed my spirit. He gave me respect and opportunity and eventually love. He gave me you and your siblings. He gave me a life worth living. I have never, not for one single day, regretted coming up here with him. This mountain, this cabin, this life, it is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know what I wanted." Jacob's eyes grew suspiciously shiny. "I just want to make sure you know how much we appreciate everything you both did for us, all the sacrifices you made to give us a good life." "We know," Francesca said softly, "and we never saw any of it as sacrifice. Every hard day, every challenge, it was worth it because we were together, because we were building something meaningful. Your father and I, we are partners in the truest sense. We lift each other up. That is what love is, Jacob. Not grand gestures, but the everyday choice to support and cherish each other." That evening, after Jacob and his son had left, Francesca told Owen about the conversation. Owen was quiet for a moment, then shook his head with a small smile. "That boy always did think too much," he said fondly. "Gets that from you, you know. Always analyzing everything, making sure everyone is happy." "He gets his caring nature from you," Francesca countered. "All our children do. You taught them by example what it means to be a good person, Owen." "We taught them together," Owen insisted, as he always did. "I was just the muscle, you were the heart." "No," Francesca disagreed. "You were both. You still are." Winter came, as it always did in the mountains, with heavy snows that blanketed everything in white. Owen and Francesca spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, or simply sitting together in the comfortable silence of long companionship. Sometimes the grandchildren would visit, bringing noise and energy that exhausted them but also filled them with joy. On Christmas Day, all 4 of their children came with their families, filling the cabin to bursting with noise and laughter and love. Sarah brought her drawings, including a new portrait she had done of Owen and Francesca from an old photograph, capturing them as they had been on their wedding day. Thomas brought books, as he always did, knowing his parents would read them multiple times over the winter. Elizabeth brought medicines and tonics, checking them both over with a practiced eye and scolding them gently for not taking better care of themselves. And Jacob brought fresh meat and supplies, restocking their stores and making sure they had everything they needed. The grandchildren ran wild through the cabin and outside in the snow, building snow forts and having snowball fights, their laughter echoing off the mountains. Owen stood on the porch watching them, a smile on his weathered face, and Francesca came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We did good," she said, echoing what Owen so often said about their children. "We did better than good," Owen replied. "We created this a family, a legacy. Those children out there, they carry pieces of us forward into the future. Long after we are gone, our love will live on in them." "Do not talk about being gone," Francesca chided gently. "We have many more years ahead of us." Owen squeezed her hand but said nothing. They both knew that while they hoped for more years, nothing was guaranteed. But that was all right. They had already had more happiness than most people found in a lifetime. Spring came again, as it always did, melting the snow and bringing new life to the mountains. Owen and Francesca celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, savoring the milestone. 30 years, Francesca marveled. Sometimes it feels like we just met, and sometimes it feels like I have known you my entire life. You have known me for all the parts of my life that mattered, Owen said. Everything before you was just preparation for everything with you. They danced that night, moving slowly in the main room to music only they could hear, holding each other close. Owen's steps were less sure than they once had been, and Francesca's breath came a bit shorter, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "Thank you," Francesca whispered against his chest. "For what?" Owen asked. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For lifting me up when I was on my knees. For keeping your promise and never letting me fall back down. For loving me so completely and so well. For giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Owen pulled back slightly so he could look into her eyes. "You are thanking me." "Francesca, you gave me everything. You took a lonely mountain man and gave him a reason to come in from the cold. You gave me warmth and companionship and love. You gave me children and grandchildren and a family. You made this cabin a home. You made my life worth living." "We saved each other," Francesca said simply. "That night in the saloon, you thought you were saving me, but I was saving you too. We were both lost in our own ways, and we found each other." "I guess that makes us both lucky," Owen said, starting to sway again. "The luckiest," Francesca agreed. They continued to dance in the firelight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pasts. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. Inside, love remained constant. In the summer of 1905, when Francesca was 72 and Owen was 76, their first great-grandchild was born, Jacob's grandson. They held the tiny baby boy with wonder, marveling that their love had produced this, had extended across generations to create new life, new possibilities. "What are you going to name him?" Francesca asked Jacob's son. "We thought we would call him Owen," the young father said, looking at his grandfather with affection and respect. "After the man who taught us all what it means to be strong and kind and good." Owen had to turn away, overcome with emotion. Francesca saw his shoulders shake and went to him, putting her hand on his back. He turned and pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. "I do not deserve that," he mumbled. "You deserve that and more," Francesca said firmly. "You are a good man, Owen Ellis. You always have been, and our family knows it." As the years continued to unfold, Owen and Francesca grew older but never old, not in spirit. They still woke each day grateful for another morning together, still found joy in simple things, still loved each other with a depth that had only grown with time. They had their struggles, of course. Owen's heart began to trouble him, and there were days when he could not do as much as he once had. Francesca's arthritis worsened, making some tasks difficult or impossible. But they adapted, helping each other, never complaining, always grateful for what they had rather than mourning what they had lost. Their children and grandchildren visited often, never wanting the old couple to feel forgotten or alone. But Owen and Francesca were never truly alone anyway. They had each other, and that had always been enough. One evening in late September of 1908, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, wrapped in blankets against the cool air. The autumn colors were spectacular that year, the mountains ablaze with gold and red and orange. "It is beautiful," Francesca said softly. "Not as beautiful as you," Owen replied, and she laughed. "You old charmer. I am wrinkled and gray and bent with age." "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," Owen insisted. "Age has not diminished that one bit. You are beautiful because of who you are, because of the love in your eyes when you look at our children, because of the strength you have shown every day of our marriage, because of the kindness you extend to everyone you meet. That kind of beauty does not fade." Francesca wiped at her eyes, which had grown damp. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I just tell you the truth," Owen said simply. "I always have." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Francesca thought about all the sunsets they had watched together from this very spot, all the conversations they had shared, all the moments of simple contentment that comprised their marriage. "Owen," she said quietly. "Yes, love. If I could go back to that night in the saloon, knowing everything that was going to happen, all the hard times and good times, all the challenges and joys, I would still choose this. I would still choose you." Owen reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "And I would still walk through that door. I would still lift you up. I would still offer you a chance at something different. Because choosing you, loving you, building this life with you, it is the best thing I ever did." "We are quite a pair," Francesca said with a smile. "The best pair," Owen agreed. As darkness fell and the stars came out, they remained on the porch, holding hands, hearts full. They had started from nothing, from a moment of connection between a desperate woman on her knees and a mountain man who refused to walk past her pain. And from that moment, they had built a lifetime of love. The seasons turned as they always did, and Owen and Francesca continued their life together in the mountains, grateful for each day, each moment, each breath they could share. They knew that their time was growing shorter, that the years ahead were fewer than the years behind, but that knowledge only made them treasure what they had all the more. And through it all, through every sunrise and sunset, through every challenge and triumph, through every moment of joy and sorrow, they kept the promise Owen had made that night in the saloon so many years ago. Francesca never knelt in subservience again. Instead, she stood tall beside the man who loved her, lifted up not just by his strength, but by his unwavering belief in her worth, his constant respect, his deep and abiding love. Together, they had proven that one moment of compassion could change everything. That kindness was stronger than cruelty. That love could heal even the deepest wounds. That two people, meeting at their lowest points, could lift each other up and build something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. In the spring of 1912, Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep, Francesca beside him as she had been for 37 years of marriage. He was 80 years old and had lived a full, rich life. His children and grandchildren mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated him, remembering a man of integrity and strength, of kindness and love. Francesca lived for 3 more years after Owen's death, and though she missed him terribly, she was not alone. Her children took turns staying with her, making sure she was cared for and comfortable. Her grandchildren visited often, and her great-grandchildren filled the cabin with the same joyful noise her own children once had. But every evening, she would sit on the porch in Owen's chair, wrapped in his old jacket that still smelled faintly of him, and watch the sunset over the mountains they had loved together. And she would remember the night he had walked into that saloon and lifted her up, the moment she had fallen in love with him, their wedding day, the birth of their children, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that had comprised their life together. When Francesca died peacefully in her sleep in June of 1915, at the age of 82, Her children knew exactly where she wanted to be buried. They laid her to rest beside Owen on a hillside above the cabin, under the tall pines, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The simple headstones they placed read, Owen Ellis, beloved husband, father, and friend, and Francesca Ellis, beloved wife, mother, and friend. But between the stones their children placed a plaque that read, Together they built a legacy of love, together they rest in peace. The cabin stood for many years after their deaths, maintained by their descendants who understood its significance. It became a gathering place for the family, a reminder of where they had come from, of the love story that had started it all. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would visit and hear the story of how great-grandpa Owen had walked into a saloon and seen a woman on her knees, and decided right then that he was going to change her life. They heard about his promise, about how he had kept it, about the life he and great-grandma Francesca had built together in these mountains. And those children grew up understanding that love was not just a feeling but an action, a choice made every day to lift each other up, to respect and cherish and support one another. They learned that kindness mattered, that one person standing up for another could change the course of history. They learned that true strength was not about dominating others but about protecting them, about using your power to lift others up rather than keep them down. The legacy of Owen and Francesca's love extended far beyond their own lifetimes, touching generation after generation, rippling out through their family and into the world. They had proven that from the darkest moments, from the deepest despair, beautiful things could grow if someone was willing to extend a hand, to offer hope, to say, "You deserve better than this." And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the cabin or the land or the material things they had accumulated, but the love they had shared, the children they had raised, the example they had set. Owen Ellis had walked into a saloon in Weaverville, California, in 1875 and lifted up a woman named Francesca Palmer. He had promised her she would never kneel like that again, and he had kept that promise, not just for a day or a week or a year, but for the rest of their lives. Together, they had created something beautiful from nothing. Together, they had proven that love could conquer despair, that kindness could overcome cruelty, that two people committed to lifting each other up could build a life of meaning and purpose and joy. And their story, passed down through the generations, continued to inspire their descendants to love fiercely, to stand up for those who needed help, to be the kind of people who lifted others up rather than kept them down. The mountains stood eternal as they always had, silent witnesses to a love story that had changed two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And somewhere on a hillside overlooking a cabin in the California mountains, two people rested side by side, together even in death as they had been in life, their story complete, their promise kept, their love eternal.